In a world that is increasingly virtual and augmented and fake, we have to seek out authenticity. I might know a little bit of Torah, my kids might have their shidduchim, my parnasa might be okay, but that's not enough for a Jew. It's always been consensual leadership rather than contractual, you will do this because you work for me. There's nothing more noble and elevated and inspiring and lofty than the struggle for meaning and purpose. If you had 2 minutes, you're advancing along that line and your machshava, they're about to select, what would you say to your kid? You got 2 minutes. What's the lesson for life? What would you say to yourself for 2 minutes? I say to them, don't tell me who your grandfather was, tell me who your grandchildren will be.
Rabbi Naftali Schiff, I cannot thank you enough for carving out time of your madly busy schedule to spend some time with me. Where do I begin to unpack your story? And I know we're not going to touch on everything. I don't think it's humanly possible in the short time that we have. But I feel that opposite me is sitting a kaleidoscope of a personality. I want you to take me back to where this all starts, the childhood, the environment you grew up in, your early influences, and then we'll stop off along the way and unpack different ideas as we go.
Well, if it's going to lead... Firstly, it's a pleasure. If this is going to lead to many birthday presents, then I'll say it all started during Ne'ilah, which is why my British passport, it says Neil Schiff.
Oh, wow.
There we are, which could explain, on a slightly more serious tone, I guess I do live with a sense of urgency. Maybe that comes from Ne'ilah. And I think that our generation should live with a sense of urgency, not panic, but... calm under fire, because history is speeding up. Achris Hayomim, is here in front of us, and I think one would need to be deaf and blind not to hear the knock of Kol Doidi Defaced. Hashem knocking on the door. Everything is speeding up, and we should live with a sense of urgency. So maybe going through Hasmonean and then yeshiva, and I spent some time in the army, and then back in yeshiva and in Kollel, and also did a degree in London School of Economics in international relations, which I don't really use, except for most of international relations. The history of the world is one of strife and war, and I guess Klal Yisrael is always in that perpetual state of challenge. But certainly from a young age, I really felt that we're here to do something. I was just learning Mesilas Yesharim with somebody this morning. It's a given from the Ramchal that we're here for a purpose, and you got to figure out what your duty is, what your tafkid is. It was clear to him that if there is such a thing as Tzelem Elokim, which is infinite, and the Ribono Shel Olam is Ein Sof, then we're here for a purpose. Every human being is here for a purpose. Every Jew is here for a purpose. And certainly in this generation, when the world, we realize how vast it is, but yet how small it is, and the impact that every individual can have. So I guess it began from there, and I always had a sense of purpose to do what you can with another to make a difference.
I think many people would recognize that there's things that need to be done, but the move from saying this needs to be done and I'm going to be the one to do it, that can be quite great.
Well, I'm going to pick up on one very small word that you included in that sentence, and that's the word I. I think the greatest enemy of people who want to make a difference is an inflated sense of ego, which I think is very important. I'm just picking up on it because you threw it in the first sentence. I try to read Igeres Aramban every day. Wow. In order to control one's ego and to try and live with another and understand that there are many things to do in the world. A very central lesson I learned from Rav Nach Weinberg, Zichrono Livracha, the founder of Aish, with whom I had the privilege of being close on an activist level. I didn't grow up in Aish Torah, Baruch Hashem, I come from home. I think today I straddle as many Jewish worlds as I can, Shivim Ponim LaTorah. I was going to say refer to the pictures on my wall, but as you can see sitting here, you can't see most of them. But
I need a day here just to absorb what I'm seeing on these walls. It's a world of its own. It's unbelievable. But
one of the things, there are many lessons that I received from Rav Nach, and one of them was so people say, very often they say, you do your best. You don't really need to make a difference. So Rav Nach always used to explain that differently. His taich was Lo alecha hamlacha ligmar. If you understand Lo alecha, it's not upon you, meaning you can't do anything. You can't lift up your little finger. You can't turn on the tap to splash water on your face. You can't speak. You can't hear. you can't taste, you can't think. Everything, is in the hands of the Kol Yochel. Kodesh Baruch Hu could do anything. So, La Lecham Lachaligmor, to the extent to which you understand that you can't do anything, then La Toben Chareli Bottom, and then go and do everything.
Wow.
And there's another mission in Pirkei Avos, which also just very, very much, it's posher when you hear it, but Asir Tzoncha Kirtzone, Kideshi Asir Tzone Kirtzoncha. If you make your Ratzon the Ratzon, if you do your best to make your Ratzon the Ratzon Hashem, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants his children home. He wants us, Atem Tiyuli Mamleches Konim V'Goy Kodesh. The Sfanu over there says, Lahovin Lahuris Lachala Mina Enoshi. That you've got to understand what you're here for. You've got to understand Machivasa Be'Lomo. And once you understand it yourself, then you understand your tafkid is Lahuris. To teach Kolamina, all of mankind. That's a pretty tall order. That's, but we say it all the time in our davening. So, either you hear the words and you're real with it, or you're bluffing. And who you're bluffing? Yourself? Rebbeinu Shalom. Vani Sfilasi. I am saying these words. I am my tefillah. Nobody else knows what I'm saying. The only being who knows what I'm saying when I daven is myself and Rebbeinu Shalom. So what do you protect? So we say these words. Do we mean it, or are we bluffing ourselves? So I had the zchus of coming into touch with great human beings, great Yidden, who took the Rebbeinu Shalom seriously. And I've always been inspired by that authenticity. Rav Yaakov Katz, who was the Rosh Kollel in Yeshivat HaKotel, lives in Sanhedria. He was a chavrusa with the Rav Adari, he was the Rosh Yeshiva of HaKotel. His davening, he's a Kohen. We were davening opposite the Kodesh Kodashim in Yeshivat HaKotel. I must admit, I grew up davening with an Ashkenaz pronunciation. I never, davening with an Ivrit pronunciation didn't sound frum to me, I'll say the truth. Until I heard Shem Hashem, he paskened with a comets at the end, but everything else was in Ivrit. But the dvekas of his davening really touched me. His Simchas Torah dvekas touched me. And when he would sing, Emes, Atur Rishon, Atur Achar, and Mibaladeche, Elonim, Baruch Elokeinu She'baranu Lichvodo, it was real. I guess I just said it Ashkenaz.
Exactly, I was just thinking.
She'baranu Lichvodo, Vivdilanu Min HaToim, V'natan Lanu Torat Emet.
It's funny you mention this, because I've always felt that the Sfadi Havara, it brings Torah to life in a way that I've never experienced it through the Ashkenaz pronunciations. I don't know what it is, but...
I think if you seek out authenticity, then the clothing and the accent and the language is not really the point. You look into the eyes of authentic people. So I was always I was always attracted to people who, when they... To Rabbonim, to teachers, who when they read a posuk, is Hashem talking to you? He gave us the Torah, and one of the challenges of all of us as FFBs is mitzvahs anoshim u'lumodo. It just becomes habitual. Put your tefillin on, you take them off, you shackle a bit, you say the Shema again, you have Seder night again, you have Shabbos again. But that just doesn't make sense. If there is a Rebbeinu Shalom who did create the world, did give us Torah. The tefillah was written by Anshekin Esa Gadola. That's the last words of 6 million Jews. Shema Yisrael. Whether I think this is real or it's not real. And I think in a world that is increasingly virtual and augmented and fake, we have to seek out authenticity. And that also is really what led me to Survivors as well. But it's also it's what led me to Rav Nach. The Rav Nach, just ask, Ma Hashem Elokecha Shel Mi, what does Hashem want from you? You can know lots of Torah, but what does Hashem want of you? What does He want of Klal Yisrael? When you look around at the world around you and you see, such huge numbers of Jews being lost, and lahavdil, but being from Jews being lost from being from, and Jews who might not have been brought up in homes like that, so they're going further afield. Sometimes, they're marrying out, assimilation. So if you're supposed to be Malmeches Kohanim V'Goy Kodosh, if you Amzu Yotzarti Li Tilasi Yisapera, that's what we are supposed to be in the world. We're supposed to be Mekadshe Shemecha. If we're not, then we are way off course. So if I might know a little bit of Torah, my kids might have their shidduchim, my parnasa might be okay, but that's not enough for a Jew. And if you take that seriously, you got to do something about it.
Truly phenomenal to hear that entire flow from yourself, the different inspirations around your journey. Take me into the process of creating, incubating, and scaling over a dozen organizations to date on these beautifully presented premises. I just drove into Hendon and just flanked from one side to the other side, the big signage, the big buildings. What is your blueprint that lets you take that inspiration that you had from the Rabbonim, the teachers around you, and said, I'm going to do it, and this is the process that I'm going to do, and I'm going to rerun this process time and time again?
I began with a frustration that a lot of people sit around talking, committees, and even with Aish, I remember that one of the first guys at Aish, he used to stop me in the old city, said, we've got to have a meeting. I'd never had a meeting before in my life. What are you in a meeting? What do you have a meeting for? So, and my first mantra, I'm sure is somewhere on the wall, somewhere over here, was JDI. What does JDI stand for?
Probably just do it.
Just do it, right? The tick. One of my favorite, you're in branding, one of my favorite graphic logos was when somebody turned the tick into a chauffeur,
right,
and said, just do it.
Just do it. Very good.
Yeah, that was one of the best. I love that one. So just do it, meant, just get on with it and do it. So I remember Rav Nach, saying about himself, he didn't know what to do. He was a Hasidic Einekel. His great grandfather was the Slonim Rebbe. It's a whole story why he didn't end up, exactly going on that route. But he didn't know the tech. He didn't know about fundraising. He didn't know about starting a movement. But he had the Rotzen. Again, I say, if you're serious about it, the Rabbi Schiff is the Kol Yochel. So I'm really not saying this with inverted anova. I'm just saying I didn't know what to do, but if you care about it, you figure it out. And again, one of my first meetings with Rav Nach, when I went to an interview with him, there were a couple of things. One of the things of the interview was Bishvili Nivra Olam Chayav Adam Noima Bishvili Nivra Olam. The meaning of that Mishnah is to understand your chiyuv. That the whole world is created for me. That means I'm achrei for the whole world. And so you got to do something. That's the first thing. The second thing is I remember him in the really a first serious meeting I had with him. He said to me that he understood about himself. He saw there was a big problem out there in Klal Yisrael. He knew he wanted to make a difference. He knew that even though he was quite talented himself and he could be mashpia on some people, it would never be as big as building an organization.
Where was Aish at that point?
At that point, it was already quite a big international organization. It was in the old city, but right. He was in a little office.
It wasn't the World Center.
No, it wasn't opposite either the Kotel or the Kosel.
Right.
It was already quite a considerable organization, but he understood he had to build an organization. Again, he didn't know how to build an organization. His main thing was how do you build get good people around you and empower them. Don't stifle them. I guess two of the things that I brought to the table of Aish at the time, from a very young age, I was a madrich. And through being a madrich in a youth group, you learn basic achrayas, basically how to do things on a basic level. And then as you grow, you're not only responsible for your group, but you're responsible for other madrichim, and them running their groups and then being a Rosh Machaneh and having 20 madrichim and running a training program for them. That was one thing. And the other thing is, even though I was not, I was in the army for a year and I was nothing, but I guess I sort of saw organization and delegation and a chain of command, even though I prefer the model of servant leadership over command, and I've always tried to build things with a sense of we and not I, and let's do this together, and this is our problem, we've got to share the problem. So it's always been consensual leadership rather than contractual, you will do this because you work for me, or these are your hours, and figuring it out together. And you figure it out as you go. That there aren't really leadership manuals, although Baruch Hashem, I now over the years I've interviewed and identified, and I'd like to think nurtured many hundreds of people in leadership positions, and tried. People ask, what is Jewish Futures? Is it an umbrella organization? I always try to describe it actually as a platform which is the opposite of an umbrella,
Right.
where we gather like-minded people together. They coalesce around a certain set of shared core values. And together, I personally and us as an organization, we're trying to propel and empower people forward, but at the same time to work together for the same goal. What often happens in leadership is the ego is so strong that people feel they need to do it themselves and get accolades, and the ego sort of runs away. The mi barosh that is one of the challenges. I'd like to think that Jewish Futures is a structure that, at least b'she'ifa, at least in aspiration, are people really working together with this sense of shivim ponim. There are different pathways to reach the same goal, and let's try and attract people who also want to make a difference and empower them and give them the runway, whilst working within this rubric of core values, l'shem shamayim, with anova, with a sense of achdus, etc.
That's phenomenal to hear. Looking at the timeline now and seeing the different logos on the outside of the building, I have difficulty believing that the success and the impact that you've had for teens, for adults, affiliated, unaffiliated, across the globe, has happened in one consecutive successful streak. In my mind, there must have been ups and downs along that journey, and not all plans that you may have had panned out the way you did for them. And I'm curious to know which of your dreams, if any, along this journey have crashed and burned along the way, and what did your recovery process look like?
Every day is a failure. Every day is a failure. And the real test of leadership is the resilience and the persistence. In frum parlance, that means emunah and betochen. You're trying to do the Ratzon Hashem, and Hashem can't fail. But al pi hateva, and you probably don't believe me, but I assure you, firstly by definition, I'll tell you very personally, the only home that we own is in Yerushalayim. I put my tefillin on in my house and touch the kosel in less than 2 minutes. By definition, the fact that we are here in Hendon, London, England is a failure, because we should have got the job done already. Klal Yisrael, kibbutz golios, umolar tzdeus Hashem. So, and I really believe that we're still living in the time of Churban, the Tsar Shechina, is unimaginable. That so many of the Rebbeinu Shem's Kinderlach are so far away, and those of us who think we're close, we're not that close, and I don't think we really hear the call. So on a certain level, and I'll say this in like Rav Nach he was the most frustrated person, because he took up the mantle to try and wake up Klal Yisrael to their mission, and maybe I don't know, in his 30s, after having learned many years in the Mir and having consulted with the Gedolei Yisrael, but 40, 50 years later he hadn't succeeded. And I remember standing next to him when they inaugurated the first building of Aish opposite the Kotel, and it was a euphoric moment really for everybody. Everybody knew where he had begun, where he got to, and he got this prime real estate opposite the Kotel. But he was frustrated because it wasn't enough. So I really mean that we're not doing the job well enough. So I can give you a party political broadcast and tell you how wonderful everything is, and you were very nice in your praise just now, but we're not reaching enough Jews in a deep enough way, in a dynamic enough way. We're not yet turning the tide. And as you said, there are many organizations. There's Chazon that's working in the frum world, to try and shift things from rote to real, from mitzvah anashim b'lu'ada to rachmana libabai, to be real about your frumkeit, from me, just a selfish sense of as long as my Shidduchim Parnasa Talmud Torah is okay, then I'm all right, Jack and Yankala. Nothing else matters. But that's not what a Yid is supposed to be. That's not successful enough on any level, on the fundraising, on the numbers we're reaching. J-Roots, we know that our trips to Poland are probably one of the most powerful chinuch educational products of Ashpa in the world today. It should be exponentially bigger. We know that Aish is reaching 7,000 people a year, a third of the young people on campus, but that's not enough, and it's not deep enough. It's not enough. But that's all of this, all the things that we're doing. Jewish Futures is reaching over 20,000 people a year, but it's I'm never satisfied, but that's not a
right. No, this is giving me a completely different perspective. I didn't expect you to respond with that, and just to think of waking up every morning, where on the one side of the scale you've got the tremendous work being done and the tremendous achievements, and on the other hand, there's this equilibrium of there's so much more to be done, and we cannot just rest and be satisfied and celebrate our successes. But there is a much bigger world with much more potential and a massive job at hand that needs to be accomplished.
Sure, people don't realize the pain and the loneliness of taking achrayus. It's tough. It's really tough. And the fact there is some success, but it's not the point. There's so much more to do all the time, and one of the challenges today is in instilling in young people a sense of leadership and purpose and meaning and making a difference, is that the world out there shies away from, we spoke about machovosa be'olama. Chiyuv is heavy, achrayus is heavy. The R word, the responsibility, is not something that young people really want to hear. Young people used to have to go out to work, and I wasn't even talking about learning and collab. I'm not even talking about them. I'm just talking about in general the world out there. At the age of 14, 15, 16, you went out and you worked and you helped the family. Today it's safuch al afuch, and that has, of course, that's influenced the Jewish world and the frum world as well. So even people who become klei kodesh, the sense of the buck stops with me and I need to take achrayus for what's going on out there is one of the most difficult things that no matter how hard it is, Mesiras Nefesh is the lifeblood of being a Jew. But the truth is, how much Mesiras Nefesh is there out there in the world? How many of us have spent one night without a duvet? With the central heating, and how many of us have not grown up with some money in your pocket and a driving license? And people don't deal with failure very well,
right?
But I want to stress again, even though I said that every day is a failure, and mitzad sheni, ashreinu matov chalkeinu, every effort is a success, and that's the onu amenim v'heim amelim, onu amelim u'mekablim schar. We get every ounce of effort you put into Torah and mitzvahs and Klal Yisrael and askonos and everybody. That's nitzchias. If you're trying to fulfill the Ratzon Hashem in whatever you're doing, that's nitzchias. So at the same time, as I said, every day is a failure. There's no such thing as failure on the other hand. So yes, I guess I live
Yeah, it's interesting. Rav told me recently that he recently got involved in some public awareness for the benefit of the community, and the amount of negative response he got to it. And he said to me, Aaron, anytime you're going to put your head out there to try and do something good, there's going to be people waiting to come at you. And he shared with me some of the messages he'd received. And this was a completely no agenda, wasn't trying to sell anything or make any money. He was purely raising awareness about a certain topic in the community. And like you're saying, the Mesiras Nefesh that it takes for somebody to come out there and do something different and shake things up a bit, the responsibility and being able to deal with, not everyone's going to love you for what you do, and being able to just stay focused on that goal is truly remarkable.
Yeah, but it's almost embarrassing to use the word Mesiras Nefesh in anything we're doing. When we talk about Mesiras Nefesh, like Holocaust was Mesiras Nefesh. Keeping Shabbos in New York in the 20s and the 30s, when you lost your job every week was Mesiras Nefesh.
Yeah.
Pas v'melach, Eretz Yisrael, and that was Mesiras Nefesh. So you and I talk about Mesiras. It's almost embarrassing in the context of Jewish history. So Ashreinu, we have a little bit of an opportunity to be a little bit Mesiras Nefesh. But it is very difficult, and I'll say something even more fundamental. The name, our name is Yisrael, Klal Yisrael. Yisrael is a bracha, but the meaning of the bracha is to struggle.
Yeah.
But it also means noble, elevated, srora, because there's nothing more noble and elevated and inspiring and lofty than the struggle for meaning and purpose. But we have to bring up kids to understand this, that to be a Jew and to be responsible and to have genuine simcha in your life, you're going to deal with tough things, but that's okay. It's okay. that's the only way you grow. You only grow from nisyonos. You only grow from exercising your muscles in ruchnius and in gashmius and in the klal and there's no greater pleasure than seeing other people gain from what you're doing. People think that pleasure is sitting at home in the armchair, or only being surrounded by your own children and the einiglech, your grandchildren, and having nachas from them. And that is a great pleasure, but we've got to go further than that. You take pleasure from having impacted your shochein and your kehillah and the klal. It's exponentially more, and that's the chiyuv on every Jew. And again, chiyuv, oh my gosh, chiyuv, it's too heavy. It's the pleasure. It's the pleasure of being a yid. It's l'sakin olam b'malchus shaka. That's what we're here for.
And you've come from a family of people who have put themselves in uncomfortable positions. A family of fighters. You mentioned you were in the Israeli army, you were in the Givati Brigade. I can't rattle off your Israeli ID number as quickly as you can. Your father was in the British army. There you go. I knew you did it. Your father was in the British army. Your grandparents on both sides were in the army. You came from this background, and I'm curious to understand, you're sending thousands of students each year through J-Routes back to Eretz Yisrael. It's not just you sitting here in Hendon, like you've mentioned, comfortable with the organization, with the team around you, but you were there in the trenches fighting for that country. You're now sending students back there to experience a much more dynamic experience of Jewish life in their home country. What does this feel like for you, coming full circle, being there and being this channel, being this conduit, but not just from the comfortable side of things?
The first thing I would say, just because you mentioned, where you come from and your family, one of the biggest spiritual yerushas that my father gave me. But actually, I remember hearing it for the first time at my grandfather's shiva, where Rob spoke at my grandfather's shiva, and he said, unfortunately, he sort of was presiding over a somewhat dying Anglo-Jewish community, and he said, very often people come up to me at shivas and matzevas, say, Rabbi, you don't know me, but my uncle was this, and my grandfather was this, and the Zayda, he was the sheikh, he was the chazan, and I remember I was 15 at the time, and Rabbi Landy said, I say to them, don't tell me who your grandfather was, tell me who your grandchildren will be. So, yes, there's some yichus, but it's zeloza. It's not about who your father and your grandfather. You got it in your DNA. There's no excuse. Where you come from and you saw it. So that's. I just wanted to mention that it's not about where you came from. Everybody has in them. Yisrael Tzemeim Lasos Return Avim Sheba Shamayim. It's Rashi. In Sanhedrin, there's an innate thirst to do the Ratzon Hashem. You just gotta bring it out of people. So everybody could do it. Doesn't matter where you come from. Doesn't matter what you know. It's inside you. That's the first thing. The second thing is I have him in my jacket pocket since October the 7th. That's probably how you know about that. I have a cigarette case actually that my grandfather got when he was discharged from the British Army in the First World War. Even though he was the youngest of a large family that came from Tarnow in Galicia to Stamford Hill. But he already, he was, in those days, there weren't Jewish schools. He went to City of London. But anyway, he went to City of and when he was discharged, he got something that said, he was discharged from the British Army. My father was in the army of the Second World War. And I have his diskette, his ID badge that says Schiff Jew. And I have mine from the Israeli army. But the reason why I have, since October 7th, I put it in my pocket, maybe this relates to your question, I also have inside that case, I'm taking out of my pocket now, something else that you'll see. I have tiddlywinks. And the reason why I have tiddlywinks, here, you can see them.
I can see.
You can say yes to the audience. Yes, they won't believe it because they can't see it. But I have stones from the end of the railway track in Auschwitz, stones from Ir David, Yerushalayim, which have been discovered just recently, but they're 3,000 years old. And I also have stones from Kibbutz Be'eri and Kfar Aza. And I have tiddlywinks. And maybe the most peculiar thing is, why have I got tiddlywinks? And the reason why I have tiddlywinks is to remind me that to be a Jew is to be in a constant state of milchama, a sense of urgency, which what we began with. And it doesn't matter where you are. The reason why I have it in my pocket is because maybe this is your question. I said to you, our only home is in Yerushalayim, and I want to go home. I want to be in Yerushalayim. I want to be in Eretz Yisrael. I mean, how can you not want that as a Jew? But I realize that the battle is everywhere. There's a battle for Yedias Hashem, for Avas Yisrael, for being real with what we're here in the world to do. Which again, I said with Machavosa Boilama, but our chiv in the world is Lisaneg al Hashem. The greatest pleasure is Lisaneg al Hashem. I part of what I do is I need to raise the money for these mosters. I've met a lot of people with big houses and yachts and planes and cars and again, when I say lots, I wish there were many more, and I wish people were more forthcoming. But that's another discussion. But that doesn't lead to happiness. The greatest happiness in the world is Lisaneg al Hashem. It's the greatest pleasure. So it's a pleasure. So that I feel very, very close to Yerushalayim, to Eretz Yisrael. But if you're a Jew, you feel close to Jews on Bondi Beach and in Manchester and in London and all over the world. We're one people. I'll share with you something in that regard. It's something I'm actually writing now, but your listeners might find of interest. So as you know, I've had the tremendous chus of interviewing many survivors over the years. And I was just reminded just the other day about one very special survivor, they're all special, that I interviewed 20 years ago in Borough Park. His name was Menachem Mendel Rubin. Schis Ayugan Laini. He was the Muzhai Rebbe. And I came across him because his wife, Rebbetzin Chana Rubin, Alei Shalom, wrote a book called The Final Solution is Life. I've actually got it over there on my desk. Uh-huh. The Final Solution is Life. And that attracted my attention. The final solution, our final solution is life, is we're going to bring life back into the world. So I read the book and forensically found the phone number, from some photocopy in the book. And he had a steeple on Ocean Parkway in Brooklyn. I went to meet him. And at the time, I wanted to ask from survivors, what do I answer? I think JRUS was just being formed at the time. We were doing Poland trips just from Aish. And people said to me, "You're crazy. Why are you taking young people who don't believe yet in the Ribono Shel Olam? Why are you taking them to Auschwitz? That's the biggest kasha on Hashem." So I thought, I'm gonna ask that question from survivors. That's how I got into interviewing survivors, just from that. So in 2006, I visited. He was already very old. I think he was nifted in the following year, and he had survived Auschwitz. And so I asked him the question. So he said to me, what's the parsha? Go open the parsha, the beginning of the parsha. It was Parshas Korach. He said, what's the question that people have? The question is, Anoshim v'taf. Men, women, and children. That there was no avchana. People were killed. How can that be? Where's the tzedek? So he said, look at Rashi there. What does Rashi say? Rashi says something like kamakasha machlokas. How harsh the din on machlokas is. When there's a din on machlokas, it's not mavchim between tzaddik, Russia, men, women, and children. Everything is taken away. And then he said something that I will never forget, that I hope has impacted my life. For good, at least I can repeat it anyway. He said I was a Hasidic Eidekel, and in the years before I got married, they sent me to uncles and cousins across Europe who were all Rebbes in Stettlach. And he said I am made that there wasn't an Ir or a Yorah Yisrael where there wasn't machlokas. And for the first time in our conversation, we should stop and pause as we just did, because again, he was from the family of Satmar, and he said that to me, and we're now Bimei Hasfira, and yesterday was Yom HaShoah, and next week will be Yom HaZikaron, and there's a siren, and it's Chukas HaGoy, and all these people are really Moshe Nefesh, and they're not like my Zaydi, and they don't shackle this way, and my Rebbe is this, and he's a Litvisher, and he's a Svadisher, and he's a Tzioni, and da-da-da-da-da. Our purpose in this world is we said, we are the people who we stand for Echad. We can't stand for Echad if we're not B'achdus. And we know that the Iranians and Hamas and all those Risham out there, they will never succeed in destroying Klal Yisrael. The churban comes from, is dependent on our period or our achdus. Haman knew that. Am echad mefurad befuzah. Amim. It's the Vaylachem Yisrael b'Refidim. It's the period that brings about the threat against Klal Yisrael Chas v'Shalom, and we know that that's the period that we're standing in front of now. We know if Klal Yisrael is together, not just next week or the week after, and leading up to Shavuos, where the one time in history when there was Achdus, that's when we got the Torah. That's when the whole world stood still. And after the Holocaust, Rav Naftali used to speak about, after the Holocaust, the whole world, how can this bedraggled pile of bones come back to their land 2,000 years later and build a country and begin building yeshivas and schools and hospitals? And, how can that be? And the answer is obviously, we're Am Hashem, She'eris HaPleita. We can achieve anything when we're focused, when we're on track. We can do anything. But when we're not focused and we're not on track and our egos take over, we're finished. We've got to separate the wheat from the chaff, the ikar from the toffel, and understand what Klal Yisrael is here for. Understand Shivim Ponim, Shivim. If we are one of the first generations, the first generation, maybe we're now the second, to come back to Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim is Ir Shechuba Lo Yachtov. It's a city that Yerushalayim Habenuya, Ir Shechuba Lo Yachtov. The Yerushalmi says, Ir She'osa Kol Yisrael Chaverim. It's a city that brings us all chibur, to be connected to one another. Only then you can be connected to the Rebbeinu Shalom. Only then can you connect to all of Makkah. And that's what we're here for. That's what we got to do. We just mustn't be distracted by different nuschos, by different styles. Everybody's got a pintel and a shama out there. I didn't know it when I was a kid. I was brought up in, not from my family, but they used to call people where I was, there was a group who were the Yids and a group who were the Yoks. How can you bring people up like that? How can you allow that to happen? We have to. There's the kol koire, the kol doidi defaced. Now in these days, when kimeit seischem eret mitzrayim arenu niflos, we've seen nisim v'niflos. Aaron and I, Naftali, little Naftali. We've seen. You look at the news. This is not normal. This hasn't what we're experiencing in the last weeks. I don't even need to go to the months of the nisim v'niflos. Each one of them would be a dayenu. Right, Mum, on the level of Yitzias Mitzrayim, because the Rebbeinu Shalom loves us. He wants us to. He's giving us nisim that we didn't see. I guess our door needs them, so he's given them to us on a plate. If we don't wake up now with a sense of urgency to wake ourselves up and to be, again, serious does not mean boring, sad, devoid of life. Not at all. It's the greatest simcha to know what you're living for. So, we got to be serious. We've got to be connected with one another, connected with ourselves, parents and children, grandparents and children, and every other year. Every year is a pintala. They're all there. They want it. The world wants meaning. The world doesn't want gaiva and might to be right. The world wants, and we've got it. We have everything. We have it. We've got the Torah is kli chemda shenivra ba'olam. It's. This is it. We've got the instructions for living. We have it in a knapsack. We've got to open it up ourselves and understand what it is, what this kli is, and introduce it to the people who don't know that they're in the knapsack or in their attic. They've got the blueprint of the world, the blueprint, everything. The Torah is meshivas nofesh. It's masamche lev. It's just you got to use it right. You got to really get it. That's why you can't give up. You asked me about failure. Failure is a little blip on the screen of your little life, which is, whether it's 20 years or 70 years or 80 years, or it's a blip on the screen of nitzchias. We've got to teach people a real chibur with what is Hashem telling you. This week's parsha is Tazria Matzorah, and everybody finds it really boring, technical. Right, but if you look a little bit deeper into it, the gaiva, the lashon hara, the distractions that knocked us off course, and a tikkun that comes about of getting rid of the externalities, getting rid of your begodim, which are boged, getting rid of the hair that you think defines you, and coming back and understanding that you're part of a tzibur, you're part of a kehillah.
That's deeply, deeply powerful. And I'm going to come back to your work with the Holocaust survivors and the interviews that you've done a little later. But I want to I can't pass on the opportunity of sitting down with a Talmud and a colleague, I think, of Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs without asking you about your experiences and things that you've learned. And I came across an article that you wrote after he passed away. Allow me to quote 2 paragraphs that you wrote, and then we'll get to some ideas. On many an occasion and at numerous junctures in his life, with over 30 books on bestsellers lists and every honor and accolade achieved, he could have reined in his enormous workload or simply taken on less. However, he knew his calling and was keenly aware of the urgent need to bring a voice of decency, goodness, and morality to an ever-increasingly confused world. And then you continued with something so beautiful and eloquent, where you wrote, like the conductor of a vast orchestra, Rabbi Sachs wove a perfectly synchronized symphony, spanning from the particular to the universal, drawing on every available instrument in God's creation. The score he wrote himself was invariably a masterpiece of piercing intellectual and emotional depth and insight. This was a musical piece to read. It was really powerful.
It's quite good.
It was really good. It was nice. Beautiful. No AI. This was before AI. Really, really powerful. Working alongside Rabbi Sachs at FJL, and beyond that, I'm sure, what empowers you today in the mess of a world we are in to continue with such fortitude without that proverbial conductor at the fore?
As you were reading that back to me, and I was thinking about that which Rabbi Sachs achieved after he retired, I was thinking of a Rashi that absolutely changed my life. And I'm sure I'd seen it before, but I only considered it when I was about 18, 19, sitting in the base of Medrash, opposite Mokav HaMikdash. And the Rashi is Pashas Vayeshev, Bikesh Yaakov Leishev B'Shalva. That proverbially, Yaakov had a tough life. Bikesh Yaakov Leishev B'Shalva. Yaakov wanted, again, if we you could say he wanted to retire, but his retirement was probably sit in the base of Medrash. But Bikesh Yaakov Leishev B'Shalva, Kofatz Olav Rogze Shel Mokav, I think, or Shel Yosef. But Tzadikim, basically the Rebbeinu Shalom Kilu said to him, like dying let Tzadikim, it's not enough for Tzadikim when they get in Mabo in the next world. But, Vaksha Menucha B'Olam Hazeh, and of course Yaakov Avinu, Bechir Avos, he wasn't looking to, sit by the pool for the rest of his life. But whatever it was, the Rebbeinu Shalom said, we spoke earlier about Yisrael, Ki Sarisa Melokim, the tafkid of a Yid is to be engaged with the world. The worst thing for any human being is to retire. And I remember at the age of 18, 19, reading this Rashi and thinking, isn't the dream to retire when you're 35 and have lots of money to spend? Be frum, but you do what you like now. You don't need to work anymore. And this is really a life-changing thought that the purpose of life is not to retire. The purpose of life is I often said to people on a Kira program, what do you think is the definition of a good Jew? What's the definition of a good Jew? Part of my answer, I would say the definition of a good Jew is a striving Jew. One of the things that's very inspiring about Rabbi Sachs, but really about all choshev people. I was going to say Gedolah, but all choshev people, anybody who's choshev understands that we're Adam la'omol yulad, but as we said before, that omol, amelim batorah is the greatest simcha. So once you get it, you don't need a conductor, you need a selech harav, you need your checks and balances to make sure that you're on the straight and narrow.
You saw that by him as he was aging and still achieving. It was something he wouldn't let go of.
Well,
that
it was
responsibility.
crazy. Rabbi Sachs was somebody who possibly achieved more after he was chief rabbi than he did. It's okay to say that. He was constantly growing. One of the trustees of Jewish Futures is Joanna Ben Arosh, Mrs. Ben Arosh. And her job was to sort of hold him back for doing more because he just wanted to write more, talk more, share more. He had so many more plans, and it's amazing. It's amazing actually what has been achieved from what he left behind. It's incredible. Apropos our discussion, Rabbi Sachs is a very interesting person. When I came back to England, I just come out of Kollel. He actually asked me. I'll share with you a funny anecdote. He asked me. He took a 3-month or a 6-month sabbatical before he became chief rabbi. I was in Kollel at the time. And he asked me if I was coming back to England. So I said to him, Ein Novi Be'iro. you can't be a prophet in your own city, and everybody probably remembers being as a naughty kid so I'm not sure, ain't Novi Bira. So he said to me, Naftali, do you know which Masechta that comes from? So I said no. So he said, come on, how long have you been learning for? You don't know which Masechta that comes from? So I said no. So he said, that's good you didn't try, because it's from the New Testament, or he of course told me exactly where it was from. So he said, you should come back to England. What I was going to say also about Rabbi, you said he related to Rabbi Sachs was an incredible thought leader. He wasn't necessarily the greatest people's person, and I hope it's okay to say that, but that's a very important aspect to understand about leadership. It happens to be I have on my desk, you can see over there, his thoughts on leadership in every parsha. His insights into leadership were incredible. But he himself, if you would ask him, he would tell you where he was very strong, where he shone out. One of the stories he told, which I think this is about leadership. We're talking. Somebody came up to him after he gave a sermon in one of his his first positions, and I think that there were hundreds of people there in shul on that Shabbos. Maybe it was Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and it was astounding. It was a masterpiece, as only he could do. And he improved with that, with age, like any fine wine. He was incredible. And this person came up to me and said, Rabbi Sachs, that was phenomenal. And he said something like, you're better with 1,000 people than you are with a small group, whatever. And he was devastated. I think he was a young rabbi. He was devastated that this person said, basically, you're not so good at this. But then he rose, didn't just rose to the occasion, he rose to his life. And I think he was a person who understood what his strengths were. He worked on his weaknesses, but I think it's quite an important point about leadership. There's a whole debate: nature, nurture. Are leaders born or are they bred? Everybody. If to be a Jew is to be part of a mamleches kind of Goy Kodesh, it means that we can all be teachers of something in some way. We can all be leaders. That every Jew is supposed to be a leader. Sometimes we get all that wrong, and therefore the ego gets in the way. But not everybody. I think lots of rabbonim and teachers suffer from an inferiority complex because I'm the rav of the shul, but I can't lane and daven and be fantastic at shivers and give a great drasha, and people think they need to be everything. You don't need to be everything. You need to be a rav miloshen marbe. You need to bring out the best in other people, and if you care about people, then you'll bring out the best in them, and including yourself. But you don't need to be perfect. You don't need to be, good at every single thing.
That's very, very powerful. On the table in front of us is a wonderful book that I actually read in 3 days, which is pretty amazing for me. I usually take about 3 weeks to get through a book. This is the book called Miracle, written by yourself, co-authored by yourself and Michael Calvin. An incredible story, the 51 boys who made it out of the gas chambers in Auschwitz. You interviewed 6 of them for the purpose of this book. Before we get to this book and the project in and of itself, you mentioned earlier the slight inroad that you had in to start this journey of yours, speaking to Holocaust survivors, bringing out their stories. To date, over 200 of them that you've managed to speak to, some of them who have shared their journey for the first time with you, and you've been this conduit, this link between one of the most important and powerful and terrifying parts of our journey, connecting the younger generation with the depth and understanding of what went on. Before we get into the backstage of the book, take me through that experience that you've had over the last 20 years, how you got into it, and how you developed that sensitivity to sit with so many people, hearing about the horrors that they've gone through, and building the platform that you have to help us, the younger people, understand and learn more about it.
I got into it because I'm always looking for ways to touch people in a real way. And I think as the years go by, it becomes more and more difficult to impact people in classrooms, from the pulpit, in the pews. And when we just need to keep finding more and more ways, chanech lenar al pi darkei. If there's ever been a truer insight into chinuch, into pedagogy, than that, this is the generation where the generation is changing every, I remember they used to say every 10 years, then every 5 years, and every 3 years. And we constantly need to find new ways. So being in the field of outreach, which is where I began with Esha Torah, but then with everything else, in the frum world and then the world of formal education and informal education, it was clear to me that a lot of kids are bored in class. A lot of kids are turned off by being forced. Kodesh Anchel, Lahavdil, and I was always in Madrich, and Madrich was informal. They were informal educational experiences, but many people were more impacted by. It doesn't matter whether it's a Purchim camp or a Beis Yaakov or something to the left of that. Often camp can impact people and their life trajectory much more. So it was clear to me. It was always clear to me that we need to always be innovating, and if the world is changing, then our message stays the same, but the tune is a little bit different. The instruments are different. The chatzotzros, Moshe had to be gones chatzotzros because the medium needs to change, even though the message stays the same. So it was clear to me once I had visited Poland 2 or 3 times that Kli is a Kli that rips away the externalities, the superficiality of everyday life and reaches somewhere deeper. So the experience is very powerful, which is why we created a whole organization just to give people experiences. That really explains why J-Roots. I knew experiences were powerful in Eretz Yisrael, but it was another one in Poland. And the truth is that we went on to create powerful Jewish experiences for Jews from all different backgrounds to all sorts of places all over the world. It's amazing. I was just talking to Chavus this morning about Kerastir. Who would have thought people would go to Poland just 40, 50 years ago, and that would be the most powerful injection of Yiddishkeit. But the other thing that impacts people enormously is people. People impact people. And if you think about your own life and why you are what you are, probably was either an experience or a person that you met, and you looked them in the eyes and you felt something special, and there was a genuineness, an authenticity, a sincerity. It could be a parent or a grandparent or a Rebbe, So initially, I think I mentioned this before. I started interviewing survivors because I wanted to ask them the big $1 million question. Where was God? And I felt we weren't yet ready to deal with that question, as it says in Pirkei Avos, b'shasha mesa mutalafanov, when things are too fresh, you can't really talk reason and rationale, and it's inappropriate. But I thought that people who've been through it themselves, they have some sort of moral right at least to express an opinion. So that's why I started interviewing survivors. But it went way beyond there because there was something else I saw in survivors, and that was authenticity, a genuineness. Because survivors have been through extreme life circumstances, they don't, in a way, owe anything to anyone. They don't need to pretend. And in a religious sense as well, survivors who turn their back on Yiddishkeit, they're honest about it. They're not pretending. And the people who didn't are also honest. They don't need to pretend to be frum. They had every reason not to be frum, every excuse when they were left alone in Europe. And there are plenty of people who did. Those who didn't, I found way beyond just asking them that big question. They were thoroughly authentic people. And as I said before, in a world of virtual and augmented and superficial reality, which is a contradiction in itself, we need to find authenticity. That's all we need to give to our children, to our pupils, and our spouses. The world needs to be an authentic way. And MS is Torah. Torah is MS, but you need to find a way to get it over to people, because we are dumbed. We're not created against MS in a fake world. So I continued to interview survivors beyond that first stage, which was over 20 years ago, because I savored their authenticity and realized that they could actually be the greatest teachers of future generations. And you could ask them questions about, what is it that your parents, how did your parents bring you up? What was your experience as a young person that took you through Auschwitz and the death march, and then the survival alone with no money and no parents and nothing? And then you got up and you rebuilt a life of Yiddishkeit and of goodness and of simchas achai. How did what did your parents teach you? And the reason I asked that question, I guess when I started, I was a younger parent, and I wanted to know as a parent, what do I teach a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old? Because most of the people that I was interviewing had left their parents when they were between 13. Let's say 13, 14, 15, 16. And if you think about a 13-year-old today, 14 or 15-year-old, You referred to the book, the tzaddikim that I met, the people I met, they were left. One of the six, the first of these six that I met in Manchester, Yaakov Yosef Weiss, Zichrono Livracha. His father was nifter when he was 9. He was orphaned at the age of 9. And he remembered. Listen to this, Aaron. He remembered when I asked him about emunah and bitachon. He said, I think I asked him, what do you remember that your father taught you? Again, he was 9 when his father was nifter. He said he remembered his father teaching us at Seder night that you can be as lower than the low. You can be, memtesh sharituma. You can be in the slavery of Mitzrayim, and everything's dark and it's impossible. And Hashem can save you. At the last minute, He can save you, and He can turn everything around. And then he told me this, this incredible story. But what did we do at the Seder, say at the Seder, share at the Seder that will last through Auschwitz? I remember I asked many survivors, what's the last thing your parents said to you? We've all seen those pictures, queuing up, and what's the last thing your parents said to you at that point? And by the way, many of them answered, "Bleib Yid." Du bist a Yid, bleib a Yid. And then I've asked groups, if you had 2 minutes, you're advancing along that line, and your machshava, they're about to select, what would you say to your kid? You got 2 minutes. What's the lesson for life? What would you say to yourself for 2 minutes? I mean, there's so much more to tell about this, but I carried on interviewing survivors because I feel that these people who've been through the extremities of life and come out as intact as they could, and you can't be intact after such a trauma. They have so much to tell us, and I think it's clear to us all now as we come out of the period of Meso Mutar Lefanov that the Holocaust, the Shoah, the Shnei Sazam, whatever we want to call it, and what we want to call survivors, She'eris HaPleita. When we learn about Purim and Hanukkah and Pesach, we don't learn how much concrete it took to build a pyramid, or how big the glasses of wine were at the Suda of Achashverosh, or exactly how they fought the Yovon. We learn about La Shicham Terasecha and what the Mi Kamocha Be'elim Hashem, Revach Vatzola Yamod La Yudim Miwakim Acher, Mi Yodei Elim Leis Kazet. We Lira Sasatzu Giliot Somi Mitzrayim, and what are the values? What are the lessons? And to me, it's really, really clear that as the years go by, what we will learn, and we have to learn, we owe it to 6 million, and we owe it to the survivors, and we owe it to ourselves. And Shalavicha v'yagecha sekenecha v'yomrulach. We earn it. We owe it. What are the lessons we will learn? The enduring lessons are, they might be slightly different because every enemy that strives us against us and whatever calls it, whatever brought it about, is different. But that which will remain is the emunah, the bitachon, the resilience, the persistence, the drive, the ability to get up again. The netzach Yisrael Yishaker. That's it. That's the course of Jewish history. So from the get-go, in interviewing survivors, I wanted to hear those values. I wanted to learn from them, sitting within the crucible of what they went through. But the kli, I'm sorry to say, how much Zyklon B it took to, in a gas chamber, or what this was made of, that was made of. Those are interesting surrounding, but that's not the point. The point is not exactly the eyewitness testimony. It's the values, it's the legacy, it's something much, much, much deeper. Why is there anti-Semitism in the world? What's behind it? And I remember hearing from Rabbi Rabbi Isaac Bernstein, Zichrono Livracha. I remember hearing when I was probably 15, 16, he brought the Gemara that says in Indifference, Pnei Ador ki Pnei Kelev, that the face of the generation will be like a dog. And I think it was Reb Chaim Volozhin who said that what that means is that in the Dar of Ikvus and Mashiach, what does a dog do when you hit a dog with a stick? The dog goes for the stick instead of seeing what's behind the stick. So similarly, the Holocaust, unfortunately, has been it turned into a science of the stick. What exactly is the stick? And I don't know, the art, the poetry, the architecture, the museums and the candles, but there's something much, much, much deeper. Much deeper. People are asking me now, especially after the book, what do you see the future of Holocaust education? Are you worried about the future of the Holocaust generation? Somebody asked me the screening of the film Undeniable on Sunday, and I said, I'm not worried. I'm not worried about the future of Holocaust education. Holocaust education is not separate from any chiduch. We teach our children about Purim, Chanukah, Pesach. We teach about B'chol Dor V'Dor. I'm not worried about the future of Klal Yisrael. Klal Yisrael, Netzach Yisrael Lo Yishake. We're here forever. Ama Netzach, we have Nisa. We will be here forever. The question for Aaron and Naftali is whether we will be part of it. I'm not worried about God. He's got a plan, and his people will be part of it. The question is, what do we choose? And whoever you are, you're from, you're not from. We all have this bechira. Are we going to, just go through life as robots and just a machine, wipe on, wipe off, fill it on, fill it off, shake a bit here, shake a bit there, get rid of your chametz, don't get rid. What do they think of me? That, or are you going to be real with this and get the geschmack out of life?
Wow. It's extremely, extremely powerful. At what stage did you discover this specific story from all the interviews and information that you were gathering and decided to pursue it?
I interviewed Rabbi Yosef Weiss in Manchester in, I think it was June 2006, and he told me this incredible story. In fact, the reason why he told me the story is because he was one of the early survivors that I interviewed, and I asked him about Frumkeit. Did he stay frum in Auschwitz, and was there Frumkeit in Auschwitz, and and how, and etc. So whilst I was talking to him, he said to me, that there is one time I remember that I davened. He said, I can't say I davened all the time, but there's one time I remember, and that was on Simchas Torah, where they took us to the gas chambers and they stripped us naked. I remember he said with a Hungarian, he said,
Wow.
And he said I was about to step into the gas chamber, and I davened to the Eibishter, should I go in first? Should I go in the middle? Should I go, where should I go in? And they said, then I remember the Gemara, that it says by the Asar Arugei Malchus that it's a Chil Hashem to see the death of Jews, and therefore I stepped in first. I went in, he said I was one of the first people to go in. I put my head in the corner, I was davening, that's it. That was very, and then I said, what are you talking? You were in the gas chamber? You can't. So he told me the story of Simchas Torah, and over the course of the next 20 years, I met 6 out of these 51 boys who miraculously were saved from the gas chambers, and I had the story. Why did I bring it out now? Because it took place on Simchas Torah, and Simchas Torah 2 years ago was October the 7th. And October the 7th, for many Jews around the world, became Tisha B'Av, and still for many is the blackest of days. So I knew I had this story of the nace of Simchas Torah, and I wanted to bring it out. And if you're interested, I'll say very quickly, there was a bit of machlokas between me and the publishers as to whether you should call a book to do with Auschwitz miracle, and I felt no, because it's insensitive. However far you stretch it, it seemed a bit difficult for me to call Auschwitz anything to do with a miracle. Over 1 million Jews were killed there, and many other people. But over the last couple of months, since it was published in England, and I've thought about it more deeply, and it's been very much part of what I've been doing and talking about, etc. Is all the parshas of Mos Va'era Bo B'Shal of the Nissim. This is what we were talking about. We just had Seder night, and it occurs to me more and more that all Nissim, all miracles are preceded by suffering. If you think about, a Nes saves us from an awful fate. Number one, and number two, really anybody who is a Jew today, and if you're a Yid today, if you're keeping Torah Mitzvah, it's a miracle, absolute miracle. And I guess I'll say even more than that, in a generation that has such a low sense of self-confidence and self-worth. Maybe it's good that we should know we're a miracle, that you and I, they used to ask, they asked Rav Moshe Feinstein, he famously said, why did so many people in America go off the derech? And he would say, because too many Yidden, old, you ask them, what is it to be a Jew? They would answer, Shver zu sein a Yid. And if you say Shver zu sein a Yid, mit hakrechts, then why should your children, want to be Jewish? So I say, but it is schwer zu sein. It is schwer. Yeah, but without the krachts. It's schwer, but that's okay. It's okay. Anything worthwhile is challenging. It's okay. I think it's good in this generation to remind us that we're a miracle, and any Jewish kahila is a miracle, any school, any yeshiva, any chesed. The achievements of Klal Yisrael are just absolutely incredible. We got to get on with the job and get it done. Otherwise, the world is just spiraling out of control, and that's our achrayus. When we are behaving as we are, then the or lagoyim nasaticha it'll be there. There won't be anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is there to wake us up to what we're supposed to be.
Very, very powerful. I highly recommend anyone who hasn't made a purchase yet. It's available on Amazon. You should grab a copy. It's a remarkable and very powerful read. You were interviewed.
What's it called again?
It's called Miracle, rightfully so. LBC, you conducted an interview on January the 27th of this year with James O'Brien. He asked you a question. He asked you, was there any common thread that ran through between the 6 survivors that you spoke to for this project? 6 of those boys, 6 of the 51 that came out. Was there anything that you felt was in common between them? And you answered instantly, yes, the stubborn, strong will to live, a will of steel, and a positive, optimistic view of life. Now, when I came to the end of this book, there was the segment where there's reflections. Each of the survivors sort of gives we're brought up to speed as to where they were in life at the time of the interview, their families, their outlook, their connection with Hashem, with God, with their families, with their communities. There was, however, one interview that stuck out, very different to the others, and that was of Mordechai Eldar. Now, we're not trying to answer the question and the feelings and emotions that were obviously running through his mind, which probably represent many tens of thousands who went through what he did. But I'm just wondering, when you sat there with him, having spoken to 6 of the 51, lining up his thoughts, feelings, and reflections against that of the other 5, what goes through your mind, not necessarily as a response to him, but just to help frame his reaction and the result of his life and the path that he took versus that of the others?
So anything I'm going to say, I'm going to preface by pointing out to you something that's on my desk that you need to point out to what's on my desk under the computer arm.
A pair of shoes.
That's right. I have a pair of shoes. It's a small pair of shoes.
It's a small pair, I should say. It's a small pair of shoes.
Yeah, it's actually a paperweight. The reason why I have a pair of shoes on my desk is to remind me that when you sit on the other side of a desk of a person, al todon es chaverecha shetagia limkomo. Don't judge another person until you're in their shoes. So you and I have probably come across that Mishnah, many, many times. Don't judge another person until you're in their shoes. You'll never be in their shoes. You can never judge another person. Very nice. When it comes to asking about Mordechai Eldar, who probably came from the same background as all the other Hasidische Jungler, you can't ask the question. You can't ask the question. I think that's really, really important. At the end of the screenings of the film about the book, which we've called Undeniable, the first question everybody asks is, why would they say why? And I always say, you can't ask why, which is sort of why, that's how I began interviewing survivors, to ask them, well, how would you answer? But you can't ask why, and you can't judge. You absolutely cannot judge a person who's been through that. If you ask me what I felt the deepest sense of Rahmanas, I look at the pictures of him. I don't really want to say any more about him because it verges on being judgmental, and that's not my place. But let me take it away from Mordechai Eldar. Zichron Livrach, it was Nifta. He came to Eretz Yisrael. He served in the army for many years. He had a small family. It was for me. It was a Rachmanis situation.
I felt very, very sad reading that part of the book. Yeah. It was a sad part to digest, especially maybe the way it was cushioned amongst the others and how they came away and what they did afterwards.
But I mean, I guess a theme of everything we've been talking about, I think it's a mistake in education to whitewash everything. Everybody was Heimish, everybody was Heilig, everything in Europe before the war, everybody was an Erlich Yid. It's just not true. And it wasn't true then, it isn't true today, it never was true. and it's a mistake and they all lived happily ever after. It's not a good. Just the other day, I was actually saying to one of our daughters, I think it's really important to, when you bring up kids, don't tell them everything's a bed of roses. There are. I said before, it is. Shveizer Zayid is true, but mit Ashmeichel, it's okay. But so I think I'm it's beshed. I'm happy that we have one person like that, because that's the reality, and not everybody. Even the people ask, why have you only filmed from survivors? I was actually looking for something specific, but I'm not. I wasn't saying everybody's from. They never were. But I wanted to say more, since you asked me about him and how do you feel about it. Let's take that specific person out of the picture. And when I look at him, I actually feel a much deeper Rachmanis. You could see next to me, it says the last will and testament of Rav Nach Weinberg. Right? So I don't remember exactly the English, but he implored in his Savar for his Talmidim every day to try. He implored people every day, sit on the floor for 5 minutes and try and feel the Tzara Shechina. Now the truth is, it's put in halacha. That's Tikkun Chatzos. But how many times have we done Tikkun Chatzos? And even if I'm a shtickle Talmud, how many times have I really sat on the floor? But so when you look in the eyes of a person like that, he's somebody, you can't judge. Tefillah is, to be mispalel is self-judgment. We should look ourselves in the mirror. Our dor, we are so lucky. We are so dor mevorach she'ein kamohu. Right. So when I look at that one out of those 6, I feel the emptiness and the pain, not just of whatever, it sounds too holy for me, but how can it be 81 years later and 78 years after getting Eretz Yisrael back and having many years, Yerushalayim and the Kosel and Chevron and every sefer translated into our mother tongue and everything on video for you to watch and there's nothing that we don't have. And yet, Rahman al-Islam, where are we? So for me, that person actually, it's not a judgment. It's not a judgment. It's really what it symbolizes. How can it be how can it be that 50% of Klal Yisrael of Mamlechas Kohen v'Gai Kodesh are turning their back on the Rebbeinu Shalom? How can it be that of the frum people there's so much mitzvah sanam sheminu? How can it be there's so much sinas chinam? How can it be? But at the same time, we live in a door of nisim v'niflos, in tremendous thing. It is a door of mevorach. It is incredible. And I think maybe the biggest achrais we have for the younger generation is to give them the geschmack and the positivism and the optimism and the hope of b'chol zeis shimcha lo shachachnu. We're here and we're pulsating with life. Let's maybe shift a bit of the pulsating with life, a little bit less, chasing after things that are transient. The food you eat, the clothes you wear. They don't last. The mitzvahs you do, the smiles you share, the care you give, the love you share, the insights that you have, that's nitzchias. But let's make a geschmack out of it, not a dark, heavy, painful chayv. But I said before, mesamchei lev, mishivas nafesh. And let's be mechadish all the time in the way we're sharing what's important to us. Talk about it with our children. Explain to them why we do what we do, not just we do it because that's what Bubi and Zaidi did. That's not enough today. We have to give them the kishur. And if you don't know what if you don't know why, so look it up, ask somebody, because the answers are there today. It's not just frag nish kein kasha. Let them ask questions, and if you don't, it's okay to say I don't know, and I'll look it up or I'll ask somebody. But we do have answers. We can give them answers to questions. And maybe that's an enormous thing also that came from spending all this time with survivors, that even though there might be some questions you can't answer, they knew why they were Jewish. They knew what it was. They knew why they came back. Why they knew what the Blai Bayid was, and every Yid in their neshama knows that, and we have to share it to them with simcha, b'ava, with patience, with love, with avoses ava.
Deeply, deeply moving. Rabbi Naftali, I cannot thank you enough for carving out time of your very busy schedule.
Pleasure.
I recently came across a short video where you quoted a anecdote which I think is widely attributed to Edmund Burke. Whether or not he actually said it is controversial, but the statement was, all it takes for evil to triumph is for men of goodwill to do nothing. And you added on, indifference kills. I think it's safe to say that you are one man of tremendous goodwill, doing an incomprehensible amount of good. And what can I say? Hashem should bench you with the continued energy, fortitude, stamina, strength, and support you need to continue your vital work for world Jewry and beyond. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. You should bring shalom and shameless to yourselves, to your families, to all of Klal Yisrael, and the whole world.
Amen.
Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you so much. Thank you.